Welcome everybody to this session. We've been a bit slack on these, but we have had lots of feedback that we want them more regularly, and everyone was missing the community feel. It kind of reminds me of being back in lockdown, being here on a Thursday afternoon, which is when we started everything. But we see it's a really powerful community, and as we've just been talking about, there's still a lot to do. So I think gathering these progressive like minds who are all working on the same thing is really important. So we've committed to putting these back on regularly. We've already got the June one planned, which you can register up for later in the session as well. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the panelists, Jim Bright and Matt Dolan from Lindfield Learning Village. We were at this, quite a lot of us, and I'm sure lots of you were at the CDAA conference last week, and there were two really big themes that we noticed coming through. The first one was chaos and uncertainty, which was, Jim wasn't there, and I was texting him and letting him have his I told you so moment, but it was coming through in all the keynotes, and as a real theme of this uncertainty and change. There was nobody talking about those quick fixes. There was nobody talking about testing and that being the answer. It was all about agency. And I think, Jim, you would have loved it from that side. But Matt, I think when you introduce yourselves and your approach at Lindfield Learning Village, I love the thing you say about, and I saw it in the OECD presentation, that our role is to support every student telling their own story, and we're just characters. And I think that skills and lifelong learning piece is absolutely what we need to be aiming for. And as an industry going, that's what we do. We put people in charge of their story and let them go and just watch that impact. And, when you're talking about the attendance issues, Lee, how could that not impact it if they're in charge of their own story and understand? So really excited to have everyone here today and kick off again. I think, it's really positive out of those themes from the CDAA. And generally, I think that we can see the impact of the pandemic. Matt today is going to be talking about, well, we spoke to Matt back in 2020. He was on one of the first Reimagining Careers Education sessions, and we were talking about the innovations he was having around the learner characteristics wheel they were using, as well as you were just launching the passion projects, Matt. And when we came back to say, and at the end of that, everyone had loads and loads of questions, and we said, right, you have to promise to come back and tell us how they pan out. Obviously, then COVID hit and everything went crazy. And when we caught up with Matt again earlier this year to say, are you ready to come back and share it? He actually shared so much more innovation, some of it really driven as a result of the pandemic, almost forced from the through the pandemic and the changes, but other innovations that had managed to power on despite the pandemic. And I thought, rather than say, just come back and talk to us about the passion projects, there were two other things that we really wanted to hear from Matt on that I think are relevant to all of us in the school context. So I'm really happy to introduce Matt, and he's going to talk about that. And Jim will grill him as always, along with myself. Please fire any questions into the chat and we'll pick them up as we go. But just before we hand over to Matt, who's going to talk to you a bit about what they've been doing at Lindfield Learning Village, we've got one quick favour to ask, but we're going to give you a reward in return. We at Become have been plateauing for a couple of weeks on Twitter with our followers, and we really want to get to over 1,000 really quickly today. We're very close. So if you don't follow us, please follow us. Matt, Jim, I hope you're not getting your phones out. You better follow us already. And Lee, if you don't, please follow us on Twitter. And the reward that the 1,000th person that ticks us over will get is the opportunity at the end of this session to ask this Brains Trust anything they like. It might be a challenge. You might want to launch a poll and get people's feedback. It might be a like for a student activity. It might be something else. You can ask anything, and Grace will be in touch with you in the background to help you work it out. Grace and Bev will ping you on private message if it's you that's the 1,000th as we go, but please make sure you're following us or nobody gets the reward. Okay, at last, Matt, thank you for joining us. Are you going to give a little context? I think we're all really excited to hear what you've been doing since then. The last I saw was at the OECD Disrupted Futures Conference, and I thought it was really inspiring, and one of the most accessible pieces of work I saw at that conference, that it wasn't just a single initiative, it was actually a really useful framework. So please fire questions into the chat for Matt, but over to you, Matt, to share your screen. I think you've got a few slides to share to bring it to life.
I do. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for having me back. You'll see that I'm not at work. I'm unfortunately quite unwell, so if I have to drink water and cough along the way, I don't have COVID. I am just sick. I was in a very unique position. I am in a very unique position to work at an amazing educational facility called Lindfield Learning Village. A lot of people have heard it. Not many people know about it. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of context. So Lindfield Learning Village is a comprehensive K-12 school in Sydney. In the Sydney's northern suburbs in Lindfield, and it's in the old UTS campus, which is a concrete jungle. It was built in the 80s in that kind of design, and we've managed to turn it, as you can see in the picture in the bottom left, into an open kind of educational facility where years K to 12 are all within distance of one another. And so you have that real good vertical learning all throughout. We're currently in the process of developing a new educational model, which does include, but is not limited to, what you can see there, the stage not age approach, meaning that we target students and education where the student is, as opposed to where the government says they should be. And so if we have a student who's performing, well beyond where they should be, or they might need a little bit of extra help, then they are provided with those opportunities. That includes accelerating students, not only from year 9 and year 10 into accelerated maths, drama, entertainment, or English in our case, but also from primary to high school, and we're lucky to have that opportunity. We have incredibly strong community links, and there's a really strong focus on student wellbeing, and I'll talk a little bit about how that really guided the initiatives that I put forward during the pandemic. Then we present our, so subject specialists will present their information in multiple different ways. So either transdisciplinary, meaning one common theme that is carried through multiple different KLAs. Interdisciplinary, meaning you take aspects from different subjects to help you out, or multidisciplinary, which might be a broad overarching umbrella, and you target it from different approaches. And we don't have any careers lessons, so like a traditional school might or might not have. We don't have anything to do with a session on careers. In fact, how we build and develop the careers education is we embed it into our KLAs. So I work very closely with our subject specialists to do that. And then in our wellbeing sessions, I have an ability to focus on careers in that point. I will also say that I am incredibly supported within my school, which I know sometimes is a rarity for careers advisors. And the trust is there for me to do my own thing. But I wouldn't be able to do it without the support of the parent community, the students, and the other teachers that I'm with. Because all of us have come together with a shared idea that education does need to shift a little bit. We want to be at the forefront of that, and the students ultimately will benefit from that. And we've seen that benefit as we move forward. So what 2021 presented to us as a society was a multitude of opportunities. They just looked a little bit different. And in the same way, as Liv said, one metaphor I like to use a lot is that every single student in front of you at any point, they've made decisions in their life that have led them to the point in front of you. Are you going to leave them with the skills that they need to write the next 15 years? Or are you going to make it a visit that wasn't worth it? And I think having that mindset with every single person that comes in front of you is something that careers advisors naturally do, but it's harder and harder to do, especially if we have a situation like we had in term 3 last year in Sydney, where everything gets locked down. And so with that in mind, I came up with 2 different things. I took the traditional work experience program and turned it into a virtual work experience, and I'll talk to that in quite a bit of detail. I took careers education and looked to then embed it into curriculum. So as opposed to teaching them separately, integrating them together. But at the center of that, and this has been central to my entire time at Lindfield, is it's developing the enterprise skills. It's just the format that we teach and that we're building them is different. And so when we're looking at work experience, we're looking at careers education, it's developing these transferable skills. It's just looking through a different context. And it was about recognizing that context to then be able to help upskill the students moving forward. I was part of a, this is providing context to the virtual work experience. I was part of a team within the Department of Education to create a new pilot program for the models of workplace engagement, which was designed to supplement, replicate, support, complement, replace. It was designed to, depending on your context, do one of those things, a traditional week of work experience. If you look at the traditional week of work experience, it generally looked like, 3 to 5 days, potentially more, going into going out with an employer, learning the skills, getting that experience before coming back and potentially reflecting on it. Some schools, potentially valued it more than others, and that generally was due to the top down and not necessarily understanding the value of work experience. But what we did as part of this model, this pilot program, was we identified that work experience can really be summed up in kind of 4 bigger umbrella terms of what you actually get out of work experience. And you see that in the first 4 dot points. The developing of in-house project, which is the actual creating something that's real and visible, that they can see, that they can touch, that they can actually say, I've had an impact on this. Increasing inspiration within our kids. When we send them out to work experience, we want them to be inspired for potentially their future jobs or careers. We want to increase their aspirations, engagement, so they can actually take what they learn on the work site, bring it back to school and apply it, whatever they're learning in maths to that. And then potentially actually developing real skills for work and training. And the last aspect of that is looking at the actual qualifications or micro-credentialing of those skills. And that's actually something that's my current project is at the moment, is how can we provide micro-credentials for work experience opportunities. So I'd love to talk on that in a few, once I figure that out. And then in order to achieve each of these things, and this is where I developed with a friend of mine who's actually a science teacher at the school I work with. We've been working together for about 5 years now. So I'll give credit to a guy called James as well, is we came up with what we called the quadrant, which meant that in any one of these 4 sub-umbrellas of work engagement, so the developing in-house project, etc., you could achieve each of them through these 4 things. You could integrate school into it. So you could actually create in-house project that had real KLA links. You could create in-house projects that actually had an entrepreneurship mindset, and so you could teach it in that way. Community involvement, so taking the kids out and bringing the community in. And self-management is those the development of those skills like resume writing and things that might come along with the development of those projects. And so with all of this in mind, the bottom left is when I present at the OECD. I wear a suit about once a year. That's not many people see me in a jacket. So I figured I'd throw that one in there. I even combed my hair that day. Oh, and this one as well. So from there and thinking about how we could employ this, when we went online as part of COVID, I came up with virtual work experience, or what I called virtual work experience at Lindfield. And so virtual work experience, first of all, and most importantly, came about because of the students. As you know, we as careers advisors we're there for the students. We have expertise that can help guide them, inspire them, help engage them. But their voice was the most important. And so at the very beginning of term 3, I put a survey out and said, what industries would you like to learn about? At this point, I didn't know exactly what it was going to turn into, but I wanted to see what people wanted to learn about. There was a lot of people wanting to learn about law, a lot of people wanting to learn about hospitality, a lot of people wanting to learn about I don't know, which was a common one. And I gathered all of that data, and I put together this 5-week program where the students would meet with me virtually online, one session for around 90 minutes. I think it was between 80 and 90 minutes, once every 5 weeks. I sat down with 27 different industry experts. Now, I exhausted my Facebook friends, I used a lot of the parent community. I had a lot of people that I went to school with. I combed through every contact that I had that could potentially talk to an industry that our students were interested in. And over the course of about 3 weeks, I met with 27 different industry experts and recorded a short 10 to 12-minute conversation around 3 big questions. What would an average day in your industry look like? What would you say to somebody who's looking to go into your industry? What skills do you need to succeed in that industry? And those 3 questions were consistent throughout. From there, the student then did a piece or a activity similar to what they would do out on work experience, but within their own setting at home. And so I sat down, once I'd had that conversation, I actually sat down with the expert and we talked about, all right, if you had a kid who come along to work experience, what would you actually get them to do? And then we found something that they could do from home that would be replicable to, I made up a word there, to what they would have done at work experience. So it was co-constructed with the industry expert itself. And in some cases, it was also co-constructed with KLA specialists at school. I'll talk about a specific example with that one. At the end, after the 5, they implemented and embedded into potential resumes and portfolios moving forward. Throughout the task, at the end of every week, they needed to reflect on one enterprise skills or characteristic that we focus on. So Liv mentioned before that we were focusing at the learning characteristics wheel. The main characteristics we're trying to encourage and develop in our students are creativity, collaboration, empathy, self-awareness, and resilience. And so what the students needed to do was pick one of those and every week reflect on that one to show how that skill was able to be transitioned across multiple different industries. Because ultimately, as we know, people might not stay in one industry for a whole length of time. So we want to make sure that they're developing the skills that they need. And at the end of it, I shared the products that they created with the industry experts, because some of those industry experts actually had real world problems they were working on. And this was a way for them to actually get some insight into that. And so I sent out the products to the industry experts and they were able to provide real feedback to the kids, to also help build that e-portfolio. So just some examples. We had hospitality. In total, I think in total we had about 70 odd kids doing virtual work experience. 23 of them did hospitality. 5 of them were in year 10 at the time, and all 5 of those have now gone on to do hospitality at TAFE as part of their HSC. So it's definitely helped. Kurt, he was a contact of a parent in our community. He's actually been a Culinary Olympics judge for a number of years. So he actually goes to the Culinary Olympics and he actually, marks food. And he was able to talk about, what a successful person in hospitality would actually look like and actually the real skills. And so what the kids had to produce was they had to produce a signature dish and then have it marked using the Culinary Olympics table by their parents, and that was what was submitted. So that was a really cool example that kids could choose to do. This one was graphic design. So this was my friend Jerry. I've known her for a number of years. They had to redesign elements on the periodic table in a graphic design. And then what we did was we took them all and actually created a periodic table that's hanging up in the science lab. So the kids were able to actually apply what they were learning from graphic design, put it into something that was real and valuable, hitting that first kind of umbrella of in-school projects, so they actually see their work around the school. And we had students now in year 10 going into year 11 using that periodic table in class. And the rest of them, I'll just put them up here. You can see these were the rest of the industries that we actually used. So it wasn't just Australian based. So in the top left, charities in Africa and Asia, I talked to my uncle who works out of England, predominantly delivering eye care to people in Kenya. And so he was talking a lot around that side of things. And we have a very strong sense of social justice at our school. That was a good way for them to be involved. So each of these had a 10 to 12 minute conversation with the expert, a co-constructed activity that was then fed back into it. From there, the questions that I had to continue to ask myself moving forward. Number one, was this actually beneficial for the student? Because ultimately, the effort that I'm putting in needs to be beneficial. With young people, as we know with young people, when you ask them to go on Zoom for something that isn't compulsory or necessary, you generally don't get as high feedback. But the numbers suggest that actually most people were engaged for the whole time. And is it actually increasing their aspirations? I have data that says yes, it did. And what are the actual skills they're developing? Is this actually worth it? It might be exposing them a little bit, but is it actually giving them skill development? And again, the answer at the end was yes. And this was probably the biggest telling sign. Do you feel more knowledgeable about the world of work because of this program? And you can see a majority of people felt either yes or strongly yes. The 3 people who said no all attended only one session. So I'm going to asterisk that response a little bit, but so that is virtual work experience. Before I go on to integrating careers into KLAs, does anyone have any questions about that?
Matt, have you seen any of the products that have come? There are a number of products around. Have you seen any of those, like the Spring Pod from the UK, and I think there's one through IBM called Career Development, or have you used any of those, or did you look at any of those?
That's a great question. I have heard of them. I didn't look at them because I wanted to meet the students where they were at that point. And I felt because, so a little bit more context around my role, even though I'm the careers advisor, we have such a small cohort, I'm also a PE teacher. So I split my load, and I've taught this cohort that went through sitting to presenting careers information to them. And so with that in mind, I was able to pull on that with the understanding that this year, I would still have the resources that I would have made, and I'm able to update it from year to year. But yeah, in this context. But the plan is, as we get bigger, because I'd be a little bit crazy. I'm a little bit crazy, but I would be even more crazy to think, because we're currently growing as a school. So, the prediction is we'll get to, between 120 to 130 each year. When I ran this, it was between 30 and 40 each year. So when it gets to that point, I might be I might need a little bit more support, and that's when I'll reach out to those programs.
I have another quick one around the increasing their aspirations. I think sometimes that's a kind of a bit of a loaded phrase. How did you measure that, and what counts as increasing an aspiration? Is it more inspired by something, or is it, you know, we often see that the answer is we need to raise expectations as though there's some invisible status of jobs which will be more valuable. What did you ask them for that one?
So I was able to look at the back end of the program that we use. So we run off Canvas, which is a Google Classroom-esque device, but it gives a really good data point from behind the scenes. And I could actually have a look at their engagement from behind with how long they actually spent investigating each of the different industries that were there. From that, I, as part of the survey where I got the data in the bottom left, it was also along the lines of, were there any that surprised you? Were there any that you'd want to consider further? And I took a pre and post test to actually uncover that. And a lot of the kids who came up with the I don't knows, which I mentioned at the start when I tried to gather their voice at the start, actually had some direction moving forward. And so it was those kids that I was able to target and say, yes, we are increasing those aspirations because they're actually aspiring now to better that immersion. School will benefit them within that career or that job, or where it could be transferred elsewhere as well. So looking at the data points at the end, the start, and in the middle helped me measure that aspiration.
Yeah, fantastic.
Can I just ask it? And this is a real data nerd question, Matt, and take it on board. But it's also like a journal reviewer's perspective as well. So I'm going to get the award for pedant of the day for this. I know. When I look at that survey, I have to say you're actually measuring two different dimensions, and you're conflating them on one. That you're measuring agreement and you're measuring confidence. So I would much prefer to see that as a statement. I feel more knowledgeable, and then with a scale saying agree and definitely agree. Because saying yes and definitely are two different things.
I'm not going to make any excuses, but after 27 interviews, I was a little bit tired. Yeah. So, but I do agree with you that I probably, from a data collection, I do need to work on my data collection skills.
Because I think the data is great, and I think I just think that you don't want to come across some person like me who blocks its publication or what have you. It just makes it clean. So I'm offering that as a positive encouragement.
And a lot of influence comes from home, and so this was almost kind of in the background. But one thing I really wanted to do was, how can we upskill parents to encourage conversations at home as well, to continue the conversation going, and the feedback that I got from parents, which I haven't included in this, was remarkably positive as well.
Matt, I think the one that you just touched on that, but I think you can't underestimate what the effort to get 27 of those prepped and delivered and planned and produced as a one person who has a separate teaching load as well is phenomenal. But hopefully you'll be able to use those again, won't you?
Yeah, well, that's it. And that's actually what I'm about to talk to is so I'll just go back here a little bit to this is when we're talking about increasing inspiration and aspiration and engagement, one of the ways that I like to describe it is taking the out in, or bring the out in and taking the in out. So we can take students out, we can give them that exposure, we can take them on excursions, visit workplaces, all those different kinds of things. But we also want to bring the outside in. And now there are 27 resources that teachers can use to show where their KLA or their syllabus is actually useful moving forward. And so it's now gone from being virtual work experience to a resource bank that teachers have access to and can embed in their lessons. to show where careers education and curriculum can meet. And because those 3 questions that I asked were designed in such a way, the teachers can easily talk about the skills that they're learning in whatever subject and relate it really nicely to what they're saying. Yes, it was a large undertaking during that time, and I wouldn't not do it again. I actually really enjoyed it because I was able to connect with people that I hadn't connected with in some cases over a decade, and I was able to hear their stories and partake in just a little bit of their lives for a little bit. And I think in the way that I presented that to the students, they could see just how important and how valuable our stories are and our own experience. You know, everyone here has their own experience, and it's teaching the kids to be empathetic towards that experience. It's teaching the kids to be respectful towards people's experience, which then has a whole many other things. But also, it's so invaluable, the experience that external experts bring as well.
Matt, I was just wondering about those interviews. So you conducted those interviews with these people that you identified, right?
Yep.
And you used part of your network and things along the way too. I wonder if there's an opportunity in there to engage the students in that interview piece themselves.
That's a great point that you make. When I took the post feedback, I asked for what would have made this better. And the biggest thing that kids said was, can we actually ask the questions next time? Because I think that not only helps to build their voice and their confidence in themselves, but I'm asking the questions or going the discussion of what I think they needed. I think when I first wrote the slide, the next slide after this was it wasn't perfect, and that was the first thing that I had on my it wasn't perfect, because I felt that at the end I probably did more of a disservice because I didn't have that ability for students to interact, asking the questions that were pertinent and important to them. So what I did as a kind of in between, and I'll fix this for next time, is I allowed them to actually send me questions. I sent them on to the expert and they were able to reply in that way, because that then provided that extra bit of depth. And so that happened at the end of term 3.
I was thinking maybe, from my perspective, to make sure there's the students to you who may have some amazing left field. To make because the amount of effort that goes into putting the resources together is immense, and what you've done is immense. I'm just trying to think of ways of which you can maximize the value of this. Just a suggestion.
No, definitely, and I'm all ears, because the time commitment that obviously went with it. If I was to spend that time again, I know how now to make it more beneficial for the students, because ultimately that's why we do it, but also more time. It's my own time management as well, and valuing my own time. My wife probably said I spent too much time on my computer at that point, but I'll leave that comment there. So I guess just the second thing before I move on. Actually, I did notice there was a comment about parents. I just wanted to comment on that. So next week we're running a careers expo at our school. So we've got industry coming in, but alongside that, we've actually I've reached out to our parent community, and we have parents also coming in and representing their industries, and so that's continuing as well, which I'm really excited about. And that's been something that I've been really keen on doing. And then this is the first year we've got alumni also coming in to talk about their stories of year 11 and 12 within the LLV context, which I'm super excited about. Awesome. I'll just quickly talk about integrating curriculum, careers education into curriculum, and where I'm at with that. Now, again, it's in no way perfect at the moment. We're obviously, at Lindfield, we're constantly evolving. it's almost like as soon as my mindset is, as soon as we stop innovating, we're failing the kids because we're not actually keeping up with current trends. And so we're constantly adapting and evaluating. So I'll give you a bit of where we're at now. Hopefully, who knows, in about a year's time, it could be completely different. So at the moment, the benefits that I can see from integrating careers education, what I found is it increases the value of careers education and your value as a consultant within that role, within staff and students. So you're seen, and I've made it to the point where you're seen as an invaluable resource to help in the planning process for units of work and for programs, because you can provide real world links and connections that teachers may not be able to do. It raises the profile within of the careers advisor within the school. It allows careers advisors to play off their colleagues by respecting not only your skills and feeling confident in them, but also, I'm not a scientist, but I know a lot about pathways to science. So I'll be working with science teachers to marry up and to complement each other to make a more worldly and relevant experience for them. It builds the framework to then build upon in meetings. I'm currently teaching a little bit of maths as well. And one thing I like to teach about algebra, and I know I might switch people off now, but whenever I'm talking about algebra, I like to explain it as if you're building a city. The strength of your city can only be based on the strength of the foundation you're building upon. If you try and build things without that solid foundation, it falls down. In the same way, if we're able to integrate careers education into KLAs across a broad range, then by the time they get to you in year 10 and are actually talking about it, they have a solid foundation that you can actually focus on and build upon. Because they have that increased exposure, they know what's out there, and it could be explicit or implicit. It's up to what's best for the students at that point. But I found the conversations I'm now having with year 10 students are far more advanced than what I had with year 10 students at the start when we first opened, because of that. And the careers also it also builds upon the models of workplace engagement, which I've talked about previously. And so currently I've created a framework where there are two ways that careers education can be embedded within a KLA, and I'm about to add a third. So excuse the poor quality, but the main two ways that I've found that you can increase or embed careers education is through either bringing people in or showing where what they're learning can be taken out. Again, that in and out idea. So bringing in external experts and working in collaboration with head teachers, with teachers to say, okay, what are you teaching? And would you benefit from somebody coming in and talking about it? Now, you do get the occasional teacher who is the expert in their room. And if you try and include somebody who might be a little bit more of an expert in a particular area, it can generally cause a little bit of bite back. However, that being said, there is, it's about establishing the need for it. And as soon as you can establish the need, and that's where a lot of my focus is at the moment, is if you can establish the need to actually bring people with real world experience who haven't been in a classroom for an extended period of time to talk about their experience, you're going to get much greater engagement from the students. So bringing external experts in, which is the left-hand side, and then increasing relevance through research. So I came up with a template that any curriculum, any project will send me a 1 to 2 sentence summary of this is what we're looking at and this is what we're hoping to get out of it. I will then go and spend half an hour, 15 minutes to half an hour going through all the different pathways to get to wherever they, let's say, these are the different occupations that might come from it. These are some of the different pathways that you might come from it. These are the skills that you need to succeed, and just provide them with as much research as possible that they can then include within their lessons. And so you're a consultant in that pathway as well. And the third tree that's coming off is the actual development of resources. based upon the enterprise skills that we're developing. So if you have, let's say we did I'll give some examples in a second, but we did a town building exercise with year 7 and 8 students, which combined PE, which looked at road safety, water safety, and the safety side of things. HISI, which looked at the people side, and science, which looked at the water table and food side. And so it naturally came together, a town building idea. I was able to create a resource that got them looking at the national skill shortage to actually include occupations to make sure their town is employably stable as they move forward, using real world examples of I use Sheffield in the UK actually. When the mining and the steel industry collapsed, Sheffield went into decline. In the same way, how can they make sure that they're not putting all their resources into one industry within their town and using the national skill shortage? So creating resources like that to provide greater depth to what they're learning is the next thing on that tree. And so examples of that, the national skills building, bringing, and then in English, actually getting them to write a fake resume as a creative writing task for a fictional character, and then looking at how they wrote it and then using that to build the resume from that. So embedding careers in curriculum is something that I'm currently sinking my teeth into, just because I've taken on a little bit more outside of careers work. It's kind of been put on the back foot at the moment, as has micro-credentialing, but that's my current focus, is how we can more seamlessly do that.
That's so good. I mean, I think that's probably one of the things that is the biggest challenge. We talk about explicit and implicit. I think if we have the space for explicit, obviously that's great, but actually embedding it into the KLAs, how, I think a lot of times people hear Lindfield Learning Village or similar schools and go, yes, well, that's Lindfield, and it wouldn't work for us. What are some of the challenges? Tell us an example of like the teachers that don't want the experts to come in. How have you actually, like on the ground day to day, how do you build those relationships to get to win over the teachers? What's the crunch factor that will sell them on creating space and relevance here?
I think first and foremost, despite my size, I am quite flexible. I think flexibility from a careers advisor perspective, and knowing that you have something to offer. And so approaching teachers who might be more disinclined to actually take part, and offering your services while respecting theirs helps to build that relationship and that rapport to the point where you can suggest or work together, innovate with, but also being willing to offer and yield quite a lot, understanding that offering and yielding may only go one way for a certain amount of time, but over a course of a term or more, or once they can see the benefit of it, that's when you can start to actually make real change. Now, again, very lucky with the context that the teachers at Lindfield are incredibly, and it helps that I've been there from the start as well. So I've been there since we opened in 2019. So I haven't come up across it too much. I also have an incredibly weird sense of humor, so I just laugh it off if they come at me and they say they're not necessarily interested, but there's always avenues that I can, when one door closes, another opens. It's just about knowing when that happens, and how best you can use your skills in that set. And even so, that because we're doing transdisciplinary units at the moment. So an example, stage 4 are currently doing a subject, a transdisciplinary unit, which involves all of the subjects: maths, English, science, HISI, PE, LOTE, visual arts, TAS. They're all doing one very, very broad topic around Evolve. So the way that Evolve has, history is obviously lends itself very naturally to Evolve. PE is looking at resilience and bullying and evolving resilience over a period of time, and evolving technologies and the way that that's impacted it. Music is looking to evolve, all these different things. And so if there's one area that I can't necessarily talk to, I know that skills are being transferred across different KLAs, so I can talk to other teachers as well and talk to them. Or I could just do, and sometimes I've just created my own resources and asked to come in and teach them, and it gives the teachers off. So that's another way that I've done it as well.
Well, that's one thing we've seen with all the schools we work with. And the other one that two other things. One is the actual impact data of the more engaged in your subject and being able to show them the impacts of, oh my God, yes, and now I understand why, particularly for maths and science. And the other one was the baby steps piece. And I think in our previous discussion, we talked about it, just asking beyond the explicit piece. And here we've got this bit covered. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to plan it, but also just bring in one expert in the first year, pick one unit, one expert, and just see how it sparks the whole thing into life. But I think, all of the things you've talked about are doable in some form. And I love the workplace engagement model as well, just to break out of that default, everyone does this 2 weeks. I think it's more personal, more relevant. And I think we're seeing the same with similar things, that students wanting more ownership over that interview process, and some of the questions being questions we wouldn't as adults ask, which gives really rich answers. So it's really exciting.
I think one thing is, and what's been incredibly helpful, is the shifting of a mindset from why to why not. Because if you shift from a why to why not mindset, then you have no reason not to try something. And if you fail, you've just figured out a way not to do it, and you've learned from that experience. And I think with that mindset, it doesn't matter what you come across or what context you're in, you can at least show some level of learning from there.
Yeah, and to the students as well.
Exactly.
Like, there's nothing bad about failing in front of them. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, keep the questions coming if anyone's got them. I think everyone's kind of inspired. We've seen some comments there that it's an awesome program, people trying to do similar things. I'm just going to share my screen for a second.
I've got a question for Matt while you're doing that.
Yes, yeah, go for it.
Matt, I don't know whether, and it may sound like an old fart question, but I look my age. I don't know whether you've come across any of your grey-haired colleagues or those who conceal it with dye, who have seen the New South Wales DET curriculum books that were produced by Sue McLean's team back in about the early to mid 2000s, about almost 20 years ago. But they were really good in the sense that they produced careers booklets for every area of the curriculum with examples of how you could integrate careers education. Now, I'm sure some of it will be dated, but I'm also sure there'll be some great ideas in there.
100%, I'm sure.
And if you could get hold of those, I even at the time, I remember there was very hard for people outside of the DET system to get access to them. I know some Victorian colleagues wanted it and they found it hard to get hold of. But if you could grab that resource from one of your colleagues who may have been around then, or if Sue has still got copies, I reckon that would be, it may help, there may be some interesting ideas there.
Yeah, for sure. One thing which I've undertaken but am yet to finish is I've gone through each of the stage 4 and 5 syllabus, extracted anything that has anything to do with careers education, put it into a table and tried to find the relevant work education syllabus dot point that goes alongside it. And so if you do have a work education class, you can talk to the KLA and actually extract those syllabus dot points and say, hey, you don't need to teach this. I'll teach it here alongside this one. You do the programming, I'll do the teaching. And it's as a way to hopefully also embed it in that way. But I now that I'm aware of those books, I might stop working on it. So, or just adjust it slightly.
Well, I think the curriculum's changed a lot since then as well. But
I think so. Yeah.
There'll be rich ideas in there for sure. Matt, thank you so much. It's really always good to hear what's going on, and I love the fact that you guys don't go, here's our program, that's what we do and ship it out and laminate it. It's always evolving. There's always something new. It's really inspiring for everyone. I'm just going to, when we talk about the next session, and we do have a Twitter reward person with a request of everyone, so hang on for a second. But as we were planning the next Reimagining Careers session, we realized that we have Jim here who loves to talk and has a lot to say, and we always get other speakers in, and we don't really give them a chance to talk. And even last week at the CDAA conference, I texted him and said, chaos is everywhere. I know you will want to say, I told you so. Can you send us a quick video for our talk or for our workshop tomorrow, just to say hi and that you're pleased the themes are coming through. And even then he said, what length is it? Hoping for a kind of 20 minutes. And I said, you got 1 minute. So I'm going to play you his quick video from that and then give you a chance to register for the next session.
Hello, I'm Jim Bright. And I'm really sorry I can't be with you at the CDAA conference in Coogee this weekend. The program looks absolutely fantastic, and I gather you've enjoyed some fantastic speakers and sessions. And I have to say, as one of the originators of the chaos theory of careers, along with Professor Robert Pryor, I'm thrilled that some of the ideas that we've been pioneering in that theory for 2 decades now are coming through at the conference. Issues like
uncertainty, the complexity of the world in which we live, the continually changing nature of it, the non-linearity of it, all of these sorts of things which are so important in terms of people navigating their careers and embracing uncertainty and understanding how they may have to adapt and vary their ideas and thinking and plans and skills and the rest of it in this complex, changeable world.
So that's very gratifying to hear. Hello, I'm Jim.
So to give Jim a proper chance to talk, and he's also just written a paper that's going to be published by then, I believe, by June, Jim?
I don't know. Without sounding too smug, which paper are you talking about?
I'm talking about the chaos one, the revisit of chaos theory for today, the Asia Pacific one.
Oh, the Asia Pacific one. I'm not sure when that's coming out. I think it's coming out fairly soon, but I'm not entirely sure when that will. There's a whole journal devoted to chaos, and there's lots of researchers around the world who've contributed papers. That's quite an exciting project.
So we thought it would be really good to, if there's a whole journal dedicated to it and everyone talking about uncertainty, we thought we'd have a whole session on chaos with Jim, potentially featuring chickens. But we'll talk more about that later. So the QR code is there for anyone to register. But in the meantime, and we'll drop the link into the chat. In the meantime, Lee Gray, thank you for following us on Twitter. What's your reward? What do you want of us all?
Yes, I was really embarrassed when you said, of course, I would be belonging to Twitter. I have never really joined Twitter, but now I just have. Awesome. And I follow one account, which is become now. Yeah, so fantastic. Thank you. What I'm interested, because actually this is a lot of the work that I'm doing with the ministry here in New Zealand as well, is around that whole, we've got the National Education Learning Priorities that are coming into play in 2023. And one of the objectives there is the future of learning and work. And it is around that. And we've also got new career education guidance guidelines coming, which pick up on sort of 5 pillars, and both of those are around, better engagement with communities, businesses, industries, organizations, and around that integration of careers into curriculum. And what I've found is that it's very easy to say and not so easy to do, and it's hard to actually see really good practice in that. And so I'm trying to gather some best practice around New Zealand to be able to have a look at that. One of the things that is a concept that I'm working on is the mapping of what happens in schools, because often in a small school like yourself, you've probably got a handle on that, but in bigger schools, it's really difficult to understand what is actually happening in each classroom. And sometimes we as careers advisors in schools don't actually know how good some of the stuff is actually already being done, and it's not actually signalled, and people don't know about it. Have you come across any mapping tools, or do you do that in your school, or some sort of matrix, or I'm not quite sure what it's looking like yet. I'm meeting with the Universal Design team in a couple of weeks, and we'll go through that. But yes, some sort of concept of how to, other than just a grid matrix, of what that could look like within a school.
That's a great question. I know that for us, or for me, I use a grid. I have developed just a two-sided kind of one, and can fill it in. So I have all the relevant work education syllabus dot points on one, and then I have all the syllabus dot points from KLAs on the other, and I can kind of map it up based on the programs that they sent you, and that they're running. And so at the start of every term, they send me the program, and I can go through and it's very logistical in that regard. But you're right, is that how can you trust that one person is actually teaching it in the right way compared to the person next to you, first of all, in the classroom next to you? I don't have an answer to that, because most of our classes are co-taught, so there's two teachers in the room. So and the second thing is, what we're actually trying to do is I'm trying to add a third element to that, so it'll be three-sided, is tracking our learning characteristics along the work education syllabus and the syllabus dot points, but actually looking to assess and assess the skills, and provide them with feedback on how they're tracking. So I think last time, 2 years ago, I was talking about how we have taken the learning characteristics, so those 5 main ones, we've broken them down, each of them, into 3 separate subcategories underneath. So under I am creative as the broad one, there's I can play with possibilities, for example. And then for each of them, we've created a novice to master scale of I can statements that support that. So, if you're a master in playing with possibilities, it's, I can blah, blah, blah. I don't know off the top of my head. And so what we've done is we've got all 15 of them as learning characteristics, which are then being mapped alongside the syllabus and the work education dot points to say, okay, this person in this subject is teaching, algebra. This aligns with I'm resilient, because most kids hate algebra. So they're sticking with difficulty with that as an example. And then it also meets work education syllabus dot point, whatever it might be. And so showing that matrix. But that's what I'm doing to kind of justify how I'm doing it within my context. I'm not too familiar with anything outside of that, unfortunately.
Does anyone else have a idea or solution? It sounds like a big job, Lee. So that's across multiple schools as well.
It's a tool that we're looking at developing so schools can use. Yeah. So, still not quite sure what that looks like, but just interested to see what's out there already. And there's a lot of work going on here too. Like I just met with South Canterbury. I don't know if you know that region. It's sort of the middle, bottom of the South Island. And they are doing, just as you said, they're getting one. Each school is choosing one unit at our year 10, and seeing what they can do with that. And we're working alongside the community education to employment broker to see what that can look like with engagement with employers, and so it might be one of the things we talked about today was a chemical reaction unit, and so that's showcasing all the careers that uses a chemical reaction. So it could be a hairdresser, it could be a chef with that Maillard reaction, it could be farmers with fertilizers, those kind of things, to show that, chemistry is part of a lot of jobs. It's not just because you're good at chemistry, you should do this, that there are a lot of people that use chemistry in the work that they do.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
I mean, you've raised some really interesting questions there, and I was just reflecting on, I mean, what we've got here and what you've got, I think all of us have got, is a knowledge management problem. And that is, how are we going to capture this? And the traditional ways of things like using surveys are abstract the data. And what I'm very excited about, and it comes out of a complexity kind of approach, and I'm not going to give you a lecture about that now, is capturing micro narratives. In other words, don't ask for big stories where people give you a really nice, polished kind of solution, but rather just little narratives about this worked when, this worked with this student, this is what I did when I dropped a test tube and I took it as an opportunity to talk about safety or whatever it happened to be, and capturing those micro narratives. And there are techniques out there, which are not mine, other people's. I've never really made that link before to curriculum stuff, but there's a really interesting possibility to talk about some knowledge management approaches of capturing all of that stuff, because there is gold out there in our systems. And even that conversation about these booklets that were put out 20 years ago, yet the curriculum's changed, but there is still some gold in some of those ideas. And we kind of lose it. We do these little government projects or these little school projects or even big projects and well-funded stuff, but getting that traction in and building on what's gone before, or even these people in these silos working independently in schools, it doesn't come together. We try to do that at conferences, but again, that tends to be very polished presentations and the rest of it. And it's often, as you know, if you go to these things, it's those conversations over coffee in the corridors or in the bar in the evening, where suddenly the penny drops because there's something coming out. So anyway, having a look at that stuff is good. I'm a fanboy for a guy called Dave Snowden, who talks a lot about knowledge management, and he's got some very, very progressive ideas about that.
Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah, that's been great.
Thank you so much, Matt, Jim, everyone else for coming. And Matt, I think that's really, really valuable of you to share all of that. I can see in the comments, everyone's just inspired by it, and how wonderful Lindfield Learning Village is as a parent as well.
Yes, thank you, Katie. I appreciate that.
Thanks everyone for coming. Feel free to stick around for a chat if you've got anything to discuss. Otherwise, we'll hopefully see you next time.